I'm talking with the violinist Rachel Barton Pine, whose latest release from CD Records is actually a bit of a throwback. It's for the 25th anniversary of violin concertos by black composers of the 18th and 19th centuries. That came out. Hard to believe it's been 25 years since that album came out, actually.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
Tell us about that journey. You released this in 1997, and you have added another piece now, sort of transporting us to the 20th century with music of Florence Price. Why don't you start by just telling us a little bit of that journey and how it began when you recorded this album 25 years ago?
Yeah, well, in 1992, I was concertmaster of the Civic Orchestra of Chicago, the Chicago Symphony's Training Ensemble, as a 17-year-old, and I was invited to give the modern-day premiere of a recently rediscovered work from France from the classical period by a composer named Chevalier de Moudamont. And it was a charming work, and a couple of years later, when I was going to make my first concerto record, I didn't feel like I was quite ready to leave for posterity my Beethoven and Brahms and Mendelssohn, and now, of course, I've recorded all of those, but I wanted to do something that was a little bit more repertoire-driven for my first concerto record. And so I remembered this wonderful French piece and thought, well, maybe there are some other works by black composers that, are also, really deserving and not over-recorded, shall we say. So I went over to the Center for Black Music Research, which existed for many, many decades in Chicago, and I found just a real treasure trove of all kinds of great stuff and decided to record the most historic pieces from the 17 and 1800s. And at the time that I was at that archive in 1996, I was shown a single page of a manuscript of a Florence Price violin concerto, and I was told that it was a hopeless situation. A lot of her music, including her violin concertos, was lost to the world forever. And I knew of her compositional voice from some of her songs and solo piano pieces. So I just imagined that her violin concertos must be, wonderful. And it was such a tragedy to think that, we would never get to hear them in the world. And so, just what an amazing thing when just a few years ago, this whole trunk of her works, this treasure trove of her manuscripts was discovered in an old trunk in an abandoned farmhouse. Like, you can't make this stuff up. And in there was the complete scores of to both of her violin concertos, and the concerto that I have now added to my violin concertos by black composers record, Florence Price's second violin concerto, was from the very last year of her life, and it's an absolutely incredible piece. It's starting to get performed more and more. I've now given my first live performance of it with the Berkeley Symphony and have some more concerts coming up, and it was so exciting to get to record it, and just really amazing to think that it was not written on commission. It was not written for a performance. She herself never heard it played because, there were very few opportunities for black composers, for women composers. And if you were a black woman composer, most of her symphonic works never got performed during her lifetime. And so to think that she just wrote this violin concerto because she had it inside of her and wanted to leave it for to posterity in hopes that maybe the world would be a better place in years to come and we would be willing to play pieces like this. And of course, now we know what we've been missing for all these years. It's such a great piece.
Yeah, I had never heard it before, for obvious reasons, but it hasn't been performed or recorded that often. So I went straight to that violin concerto number 2 when I got the album. And the music, the orchestra is very dramatic. There's a lot to say in that concerto, but it's also very lyrical for the violin. Would you agree with that assessment?
Oh, absolutely. And it's very succinct. It's only 15 minutes. It's kind of a one-movement concerto, but in different sections. It's very wide-ranging and just really tells a story, I think. It's got all of the very, bombastic moments and touching moments and everything in between.
Now, this was with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra that you recorded this one.
Exactly, and we recorded with conductor Jonathan Hayward, and shortly thereafter, of course, he has recently become music director of Baltimore Symphony.
Yeah.
So that's really awesome for him. I have to say, another one of the works on the album by the Afro-Cuban composer from the Romantic era, Jose White. Jose White was a classmate of Vieuxtemps, Wieniawski, and Sarasate, all of these great virtuoso violinists/composers from the 19th century who all had these great careers as concert violinists and wrote concertos for themselves to perform that are super difficult but also very, melodic and exciting. Jose White's concerto is every bit as good as those of Wieniawski and Vieuxtemps, and very much in that style. He, studied at the Paris Conservatoire, actually taught there at the end of his career. But, all these years, 25 years, I've been trying to get orchestras to program it, especially if it's like a return engagement where I'm coming back to town and the public already knows me, and maybe they would be willing to take a chance on a concerto that they hadn't heard before but would come to hear me. And, once you hear this concerto, of course, you're going to love it, but nobody's heard of it. And, orchestras are understandably wary of wanting to make sure they sell tickets. So not a single professional orchestra in 25 years would ever agree to put the Jose White Concerto on their program, including, and I can say this because they don't exist anymore, but the Florida Philharmonic down in the Miami area. I thought, wouldn't that be a great opportunity for outreach to their Cuban community and African American community? But nope, they only wanted to play concertos that people had heard of. And so for many years I've been saying, I'll know that the world has finally changed if I ever get to play this darn Jose White concerto that I recorded. And what do you know, this season and last season, a number of orchestras have asked me to play it. So it's been a total 180, and I couldn't be more thrilled. It means that, the classical music world has woken up to the value of these things, both the presenters and the public. And, there's so much good music that we've been missing out on, and it's so great to finally get to share it.
Sounds like it's getting some performances, yeah?
Yeah, getting to play that, getting to play the Florence Price, the Chevalier de Saint-Georges, Joseph Bologna. Of course, I played his concerto a number of times all through the years. He was the one who is often referred to as the Black Mozart, but that's totally backwards because it was actually his Sinfonias Concertante that inspired the younger Wolfgang. And so my little girl always says, well, Mozart is the White Saint-Georges.
Yeah, a radio host in the making right there. But also I remember she's quite a violinist like you are, yeah?
She's really coming along, and she's also a very passionate composer.
Oh, okay.
So that's been very exciting to, I'm living with a composer. Who would have guessed?
Take us back again. You talked about this briefly, but when this recording came out 25 years ago, it really sparked your interest in uncovering many of these works by Black composers of that time. Talk a little bit about your work with your foundation and your MBC project, Music by Black Composers, so we can sort of get a sense of how invested you are in this project.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for asking. Well, I have to admit, when I released this album in 97, I naively wasn't even thinking of issues of, diversity and inclusion and social justice. I mean, I literally recorded it because I thought they were awesome pieces, which I guess is the most pure motivation when you think about it. But I just really wasn't aware of some of these issues in the classical music world. Growing up in Chicago, it's a bit of a bubble. We have the Chicago Sinfonietta, which is one of the most diverse orchestras in the country. We had the New Black Music Repertory Ensemble. So I just didn't realize that this stuff was quite as unknown as it was. And then, of course, all the issues of representation among the ranks of performers. The Sphinx organization started right around the time as my Music by Black Composers project, and we've been on each other's boards since the get-go. So that this album dropped, and I was suddenly being asked to do things like serve on diversity panels, and I was like, I feel very underqualified here, but it was an amazing opportunity to just listen and learn. And so in the late 90s, I started hearing about, programs around the country that were specifically designed to give classical music lessons to youngsters from underrepresented communities, and then about how there weren't a lot of materials that spoke to these children's backgrounds, both in terms of the repertoire itself as well as the history, like, the fact that there were all Black orchestras in America in the 1800s, like the Negro Baseball Leagues, or the fact that Frederick Douglass and Coretta Scott King were both very serious violinists. Just all these kinds of stories to show that this isn't somebody else's music, but there's been, great and meaningful participation by people of African descent and African Americans throughout the centuries. And so being a research geek and someone very passionate about classical music advocacy and access and classical music education, I thought, well, I got to help out with this. And I was just starting to get an absolute inundation of, students and parents and teachers coming up to me after concerts, sending me emails, faxes back in the day, however they could reach me to ask, where do I get more of this repertoire? And I was far from an expert. I mean, I basically knew these 4 concertos, but, I thought, well, there's so much great work being done in academia by wonderful Black music researchers and academic journals being published and stuff, but that's not filtering out to the average Suzuki student in the average town somewhere in the U.S. And so I had started my not-for-profit foundation for the purpose of young artist support with instrument loans and financial assistance. So I thought, okay, let's take this on. And so I started the Music by Black Composers Initiative and was very lucky that a wonderful collection of researchers, conductors, composers, educators, etc., agreed to serve as my advisory board. And we figured out, how we wanted to, organize everything. And we've now published pedagogical volumes and a coloring book and a timeline poster. And we have a ton of free resources that anybody can click on and access at our musicbyblackcomposers.org website. Stuff for the public, stuff for performers, stuff for teachers and students. So we have, a list of children's books that have illustrations of children of color or were written by African American authors or are about Black composers. We have a podcasts page. We have presentation materials, different PowerPoints and things that you can download. We have directories of more than 150 historic composers and more than 300 living composers. We have lists of repertoire with links to where to find the sheet music and where to listen to recordings of it. Just all kinds of stuff. And if you go to the musicbyblackcomposers.org website and you go to the About section and you click on Projects Timeline, you can see a list of everything we've done thus far and everything we're planning to do. And don't ever hesitate to shoot us an email and add more ideas to the mix. So let's put it this way. I did not have time to Netflix binge or pandemic bake in 2020. Plenty of research to keep me busy, and I probably have plenty more to do for at least the next few decades. I'll never get bored.
Wow. Well, it's a rare musician that really invests the kind of time and energy that you have, and you're to be commended for that. This wonderful recording of the Violin Concerto No. 2 by Florence Price, included along with music by the Chevalier de Saint-Georges and Jose White and Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. Beautiful romance, by the way. I love that piece. It's out now from CD Records. You know, there's a Chicago connection we didn't mention. Florence Price being from, well, not from Chicago, but living in Chicago. And, of course, Sadie based in Chicago. And are you still based in Chicago?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a perfect central location for all my touring around the U.S. and beyond, but also it's just an awesome city. I can't imagine ever living anywhere else. But yeah, we're real proud of all of our, African-American women composers from the Chicago Renaissance. And so when people say, oh, Florence Price is awesome, she's a woman composer, she's an African-American composer, and then I always have to add, yes, and she's a Chicago composer. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for spending some time and talking about it. We hope that you can come back one of these days to Toledo and maybe take that Jose White concerto with you for our audience. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
I've been talking with the violinist Rachel Barton Pine, whose latest album from CD Records is called Violin Concertos by Black Composers Through the Centuries, a 25th anniversary salute to that pioneering album that you put out in 1997. Rachel, thank you so much for talking with us here on FM 91.
Thanks for having me. Take care.